I'm going to tell you the secret because you said it when you said that adding these notes that I was pointing out, we're introducing dissonance. I'm going to tell you the whole key to everything that Charlie Parker ever played. When they were downbeats, he was always playing notes that were in the chord.
Okay.
When they were upbeats, he was never playing notes that were in the chord. So he's always weaving between
Tension and release.
Tension and release. I'm going to prove that to you. I'm going to show you the problem with the major scale, and then I'm going to show you how a bop scale works, and, well, it'll change everything. First of all, so I can play what I just recorded, I'm going to play, just with that recording, I'm going to play notes that are in the chord. All release. If you go here to do this. Here we go. All release. Can you hear that?
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem, Savan, is the major scale, which has its origins in folk music and classical music, has 7 notes. That is an uneven number of notes. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play inside the chord, and then between the chords, I'm going to play the other notes of the scale. And at first, it's going to work. Then they're going to go out of sync with each other. Listen to this. Okay. Oh, start that one. Here we go. Watch. When I got there, I played a note that was in, but it wasn't lined up. Right. Watch that. Watch this. I'm going to play the scale, and you hear I go out of sync with it. Savan, if I add a note, an approach note, to the scale, you'll recognize it. You'll be like, that doesn't sound like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But if I do that, I can make it so that whenever that chord's playing, I'm playing a note in the chord. This is what a bop scale is. If I could do that, I can solo. I could play a lot of notes if I want to. And all the downstrokes, all the downbeats line up with the chord perfectly. Try this. I'm going to get a little fancy.
So the bop scale is basically February. Just like February has less days to have the rest of the year aligned, and that's what that one note is doing.
I'd also make the argument that the bop scale is kind of like a leap year.
Yeah, that's another.
If it wasn't for leap year, then eventually we're going to have, it's going to be summertime in December.
Drift. Yeah. We're going to start drifting.
It prevents the drift. Now that you saw that, where I did it very slowly, take a listen to the sound of this bop scale. Okay, whenever there was a downbeat, I was playing a note in the chord. How did I do that? I added one note. What's your homework this week? To add one note. And you're adding a note that's not in the chord, that creates tension. And then as soon as that downbeat comes, you resolve the tension. You play a note that's in the chord. It's just inherently more. And again, I make a point. I hope that I've driven this idea home, that these things that we learn about jazz, it's not like you say everything I play, unless you feel like I only want to ever play jazz. In that case, do this stuff all the time, right? But if you want to play the styles of music, then you start recognizing that a technique like this will make what you're playing sound jazzy. Yeah. And sometimes you want to sound jazzy, But if you want to play like a Slash Guns N' Roses guitar solo, you
Yes, I
probably don't. When you do that, this thing I just showed you about playing the extra notes, don't do that because it will make you sound less like a rock player and more like. To me, here's the fun thing: if I can be aware of the style of music that I'm playing, and I know the traditions of that style of music, and I can implement them, then I can just kind of express myself freely. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I know that dialect. I talk about different languages and how the same type of thing would happen. If you speak a language fluently, it's not about speaking the language at all. It's just about what you want to say, right?
Absolutely.
Now, on the other hand, if you know the rock language really well, and you go to play jazz, and you're using like rock slang, it's hard to express yourself and have people like, what a great jazz guitar player. Because it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you're speaking a rock language, right?
Yeah.
So, listen, what you wrote was beautiful. And I want to just tell you, for what it's worth, I feel like you took what I gave you many steps past what I showed you. It's clear to me that you worked with these patterns that I gave you, and you used your ears, and you found great stuff. The next step, and this is what you'll do this week, keep what you had, because you may like the results that you get with this some places, but not others. And I want you to have a reference of what you actually started with. Go through it whenever a line is starting, meaning whenever there's a note that was not preceded by an eighth note right before it, right? Whenever a line's starting, just introduce a new note that is one fret or a half step below the note that you started with. It'll be played on an upbeat. I'll tell you this too. The counting makes it no fun. I know that, right? It's
important.
It's really important. But when you're doing it, it's way more fun to just play. I know. But if you discipline yourself when you're playing these to do the counting, you'll internalize it to a point that you don't need to count way sooner. And I'll tell you this, if you don't count, I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. You're going to write these things on upbeats, but you'll play them on downbeats, right? You saw where that happened. Like you came in on beat 4.
4, yeah. It's a habit, yeah.
Yeah, and playing rock music, that's the habit because that's the language. That you play things on strong beat. I just want to think about what goes on in a rock band for a second. On the strong beats, you usually hear a kick drum or a snare drum. And if you listen to what Slash plays, he'll almost always start his lines. You can still call them lines in rock. He'll start his lines either with the kick drum or the snare drum, right? But between the kick drum and the snare drum, a lot of times you'll hear like the hi-hats or a cymbal. If you start your lines with the cymbal and then continue them when the snare and the kick drum come in, that'll sound more like Pat Martino or Charlie Christian or Pat Metheny or Barney Kessel or any of the Joe Pass. They all did this thing that I'm showing you. And again, it's so cool that you sent me this like about a week after I saw my notes from 1997, where my teacher was. I had the same type of exercises where I had to write down lines to play over a tune. And I followed all the rules, just like you did. But he was making that point to me that, what's here is good, but there's too many downbeats.
Yeah. Well, I don't hate a B on my first assignment. It's okay.
Yeah. No,
it's I'm actually proud.
You should be. It's great work with it. Oh, the other thought that I have for you, when you're listening to jazz, just listening, like in the car or whatever, try counting aloud while you're listening. And if you do that accurately, I guarantee you're going to notice that whenever you say "and," that's going to be when they start playing, right? And then once they're playing, they're hitting the "and 1 and 2 and 3." They'll play maybe all of those. That's the line when they're playing all of these subdivisions. But then they'll stop. It's going to be much more often that they start playing when you say "and."